All right, hello everyone. Today for Monday, we will be working on the religion in Egypt. The religion in ancient Egypt. This means that we will be working on the religion of ancient Egypt all of this week. As a reminder, you have no school tomorrow, which is Tuesday or Wednesday. So by the end of this lesson, you will be able to do three things. First, you will be able to identify the major gods of Egypt and their role. You will be able to analyze the role that religion plays and the role that the afterlife plays on Egyptian society. And religion and afterlife are very closely intertwined in ancient Egypt. And you will be able to explain the process of mummification. So let's get into it. So the first is ancient Egyptian society, just like that of ancient Mesopotamia and Sumer, is polytheistic. So the vocab word is polytheism. Remember, poly means many, and theism is religion. So polytheism is a belief in many gods. The ancient Egyptians believed in a pantheon, which means a large number of gods and goddesses. So let's start. The Egyptian belief system strongly focused on a belief in a god or a goddess for almost everything in their daily lives. Okay? Almost everything in their daily lives had a god or a goddess that represented it, and that was furthermore and most importantly in total control over it, and depending on how it happened, or able to dictate what happened. Many of these gods, if you look at them physically, as we'll do, many of these gods are mixed. They have a human and animal forms mixed together. Something like the body of a human, but the head of a certain kind of animal. That is how the Egyptian gods and goddesses were primarily seen. That's how they were viewed. That's how they were imagined by the ancient Egyptians. And again, it makes sense to a degree because they're taking what they know about nature and the things around them. Let's say it's the head of a crocodile that's in the river Nile, and they know that human beings have a human-shaped body. Well, why not combine those together and the power of nature, the power of a crocodile from the Nile, and what they already are familiar with the human body. And I'll show you a few examples of that in a moment. This is critically important to understand. Egyptian religion focused mostly on a belief in the afterlife. And that's a vocab word for you, just like polytheism. Afterlife is life after death. That there was a continuation of living, even if it didn't mean living in the body that you're currently in. It meant that there's a different word for it that we'll get into, but your soul continues on. There's a continuation of your existence. Maybe not life as we know it, but there is an existence for you after you've died here on earth. And this is where your afterlife was spent. They viewed it as a perfect world, ideally a perfect world, where people were always young and healthy. So if the best form that you remember, if you're an older person and you say, oh man, when I was 25 years old, I was in the best shape of my life. I was never tired. I was fast. I was strong. I could do anything that I wanted. Nothing bothered me. That might be what ancient Egyptians viewed as their afterlife. You'd be in that perfect world where you were no longer older or infirmed, which means sick, and that's what they viewed it as. It was a lot like if you're Catholic or Christian, a lot like heaven. They viewed it as this perfect world where everyone was the ideal form of what they wanted to be. Just a few major gods, because there are lots of them, and you'll work on a project later this week. Anubis is the god of the dead, and these are all really important for you to be taking notes on. So there was a god of the dead, those who are already dead. Amun-Ra, even though it says Ray, it looks like Ray. Amun-Ra is the sun god, like the ray of a sunbeam. Osiris is the god of the underworld, where the dead would roam, where they would be. Isis is the goddess of magic. So if you focus here on, these are like the five major gods and goddesses being women, gods being males. what's important to them that they worshipped a god or a goddess of it? It was the god of the dead, the god of the underworld. So this idea of an afterlife is determining what they worship. It's really important to them, not just the dead themselves, but where they live in that underworld. Then the sun is hugely important to these Egyptians because that's how they're going to live. That's how they're going to grow things. Goddess of magic, a female goddess of magic. Magic's very prevalent, very important to society for these ancient Egyptians. And then Horus, who is the sky god, but also the god of the pharaohs. And that's because there's a connection here. The pharaohs live up in the sky, okay? And that's why a pyramid, an actual physical pyramid, not just a social pyramid, but it's a pyramid that we've already talked about, and they're pointed towards the sky because the tip of that pyramid at the top is the closest that these ancient Egyptians can get to where Horus lives and where the pharaohs are from, where they reside. And without explaining this in detail, because we'll go over this on Thursday and on Friday, this is a little bit of what we're looking at. This would be Anubis, the body of a person, body of a human, but the head of a jackal. Okay, Horus with the sun over his head, the body of a human, and the head of a falcon or an eagle, bird head. Okay, not all of them were the body of a human, as you can see here. This is the eater of the dead, and he has a crocodile head and a hippopotamus-shaped sort of body. This is how they pictured things, okay? This is how they visualized their gods and goddesses. As we continue on, so the afterlife in ancient Egypt. Each person had what's referred to or called a ka. And this a ka is a vocab word meaning life force. And the best way to describe this is the idea that this life force is like the idea of a person having a soul today. Okay? The body might die, but the soul will carry on. The ka is that soul, that life force. So when a person died, the ka left the body and became a spirit. So the ka continues on, but the body is what is no longer being used. It's what has died. The soul, the ka, the life force doesn't necessarily die. It just moves on from the body that it was inhabiting or residing in. The ka could not leave the burial site. This is a rule that they had. Often a burial site is the pyramid or the gravestone, the gravesite area. So if it's a pyramid of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, then if it's Pharaoh Khufu from the Old Kingdom that we spoke about, that we learned about last week, if it's Khufu, then his ka, his soul, his spirit, the ka cannot leave his pyramid. That's where it has to stay. So it leaves the body. It gets out of, essentially it's like the body stays in the sarcophagus, which is a coffin. But the tomb is the pyramid, the burial site. And the ka can roam around this burial site, but it doesn't have the ability and the freedom to leave that. And if some religions picture where your soul can fly over anywhere in the universe or on Earth, it was really, it was something where it stayed at that burial site. So the ka has needs, and the ancient Egyptian relatives and ancestors who were still alive for the person who had passed away, who had died, the ka needed goods for the afterlife to make it a comfortable afterlife. And some of these goods can include food or water or wine, furniture, clothing, tools, jewelry, and weapons. These are things that, as you learned on Friday of last week when we went through our interactive activity with the Great Pyramid and the pyramid sites, these are things that people would leave in their ancestors' grave sites and in their pyramids. If it was the Pharaoh of Khufu or the young boy king Tutankhamun, who his pyramid was discovered in 1922 in Egypt, the pyramid was stocked full of thousands of these valuable things for him to continue on in his afterlife. Even servants were often killed and put in a pyramid for them to continue to serve this important pharaoh, this powerful pharaoh in their afterlife. The ka of the pharaoh needs to continue living on like a god. And so they're going to need to be taken care of with food and water and wine, with furniture, clothing, tools, jewelry, weapons, even soldiers at times were buried with these pharaohs. So if we examine how the dead were buried, The process is called embalming. So these are 3 vocab words for you. Embalming is the process of removing the organs and preparing the body. They would remove the organs from the body. They would dry out the body, remove all the bodily fluids. They would stuff it with chemicals for anywhere between 40 and 70 days. Those chemicals would be left in the body itself to dry it out and to go through this embalming process. Embalming is the process where they they create a mummy. They mummify the body. But the embalming process has to occur first because it gets out all of those organs and bodily fluids that will eventually decay and force the body to decay quickly. And that's why we have mummies today. So the process of making mummies, mummification, follows the embalming process. Embalming is a scientific process of removing those organs and putting them into jars and leaving them in the actual pyramid or tomb site with the mummy. And those jars are called canopic jars with the heads of the gods, of the animals. The mummies are then created when they're specially treated bodies because they're treated by being embalmed with chemicals, and then they're wrapped in a cotton cloth. Now, this was a very expensive process. Only people that were elite, which would be the top of that social pyramid and the next level down, the nobles and the pharaoh and his royal family. Elite people are people of wealth and power, which are the pharaoh, his royal family, and the nobles. Only the elite could afford the very expensive process of preparing a body to be mummified. Embalming and mummification takes a long time, a lot of chemicals, a lot of it's a long process. It's an expensive process. If poor peasant families, those of farmers and workers, wanted to mummify their dead, they did not have the ability and the money that was needed to embalm. So instead, poor peasant families would leave the body in a shallow grave, not a very deep grave, shallow, near the desert, where the desert began, and the hot, dry sand would ultimately preserve and mummify that body naturally. It would dry it out, where the embalming process is a purposeful process, where priests are spending a great deal of time taking those organs out and stuffing it with chemicals and making sure that it lasts as long as possible, ideally in their mind forever, and I'll show you some pictures of that in a moment. The elite were really the only ones that could afford this process. The peasants would just leave them in a shallow, not very deep grave near the desert, and the hot, dry sand would ultimately mummify that body naturally. And I have a few examples, so you might think it's squeamish, but this is an example of a very important pharaoh who was mummified. And this is what that process looks like. They're very thin and skinny now because they've been dead thousands of years. They have their organs removed. They are wrapped. They're stuffed with those embalming chemicals, and then in salts. Natron salts, they're called, and then it would dry the body out, and they would wrap it, and you can almost sort of see how this thousands of year old cotton cloth wrapped these mummies. They wrapped their entire body in. You can see it right here. Okay, here's another closer example of what it looked like, and this is a dead body of a very powerful pharaoh, and this process to make them look this way is incredibly expensive, even at the time period of ancient Egypt. And it was so that the Ka would still leave this body, but the body was preserved. Embalming and mummification is really just the process of preserving the body to last a long time. And here you see Anubis preparing a mummy. This is that written language that we'll talk about, which is hieroglyphics. And this is the process of what Anubis was doing to prepare the body for those 40 to 70 days. And this is what a mummy would look like once they were wrapped and decorated and everything and placed in their coffin, which is this around it. And a coffin today is just called a sarcophagus back then.